Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Noah from the Marion Library Service, and thank you for joining us for our Library Through the Lens live webinar with special guest poet and writer Ali Whitelock, in conversation this evening with author Poppy Nwosu. Our Library Through the Lens series of adult programs delivered differently enables us to still connect and engage with you during this unusual time we find ourselves in. This evening, Sydney-based Ali will talk about her second poetry collection, The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair. I, for one, am certainly intrigued already by the title as to what we will discover tonight. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type any questions you have for Ali into the Q&A text box on your screen, and at the end of her conversation with Poppy, I'll ask her some of your questions. Ali's books can be purchased online from our bookseller partner for this webinar, Imprints Booksellers. They're a local Adelaide business proud to offer you online ordering and delivery service. Check them out at www.imprints.com.au. Now sit back, grab your cuppa or glass of wine, relax, and please welcome Ali.
Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. As Tracy said, my name is Poppy Nwosu and I'm an author. And I guess before we get started today, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Tracy for organising this Library Through the Lens series, which I think is really cool. And I definitely encourage listeners to check out the past entries into the series and also keep an eye out for upcoming events as well. And I also want to say a huge thank you to Ali Whitelock for being here to chat about her poetry and her latest collection, specifically The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair, which is an excellent title. I have so enjoyed reading through this book, Ali. I think it is such a beautiful collection.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
I think one of my favorite things is just how in control I think that you are of creating such an emotional reaction, even from, I guess really ordinary moments, even big ordinary moments like, the loss of a loved one, but also really small things as well. Like there's one poem where you talk about driving home from the supermarket and just all these strange thoughts pinging in your mind, which I loved it. I find it such a moving collection. So I guess to start with, I think I've got kind of a generalized question, but I feel like there are a lot of readers out there who read a lot, but maybe they read a lot of fiction or non-fiction, and they might not exactly dip their toe into poetry. And I think there's still sometimes an idea that poetry is something, maybe very literary to be, studied or examined, and not exactly something accessible to read for pleasure. And I guess I was interested in how you feel about that as a modern poet and, whether you've come up against that kind of attitude or not.
Yeah, I think poetry has typically been something that people turn to in times of crisis, at times where people are looking for consolation. And I've definitely come up against that idea that poetry is not for everybody. I myself, until I started writing poetry, I was one of those people who said, oh, I hate poetry. If somebody said, oh, anything about poetry, I just, these sort of shields, as Billy Collins, the ex-poet laureate of the UK, used to say, the minute he mentions the poetry word to people, he could almost see their poetry deflection screens coming down, and he used to say that these screens were installed in people in high school. And I mean, that was certainly applicable to me, and a lot of people that I meet who talk about, who either read or don't read poetry. Most of the people who don't read poetry would have, be coming at that attitude from the perspective of someone who had a bad experience of it in school, and so I'm from that school. It was, there was poetry that was being discussed, but it didn't speak to me at all, and so I trotted on through life just claiming that I hate poetry. In fact, I have a poem in my last collection which talks about that very thing. And then one day, inexplicably, I picked up a book of poetry in a shop, and it just blew my mind wide open. It wasn't floral kind of poetry with these lofty ideals. It wasn't set in old language that I couldn't understand. It was modern. It was everyday language. It was, people were speaking my language and talking about things that I could relate to, and the poets that I discovered at first were the confessional poets, so John Berryman and Anne Sexton and people like that. And my mind was blown. I just, it was just like life was being laid out bare on a page to me. And that sense of connection to those words and other people's experiences, because those experiences were my experience. And I just found that the most liberating and one of the best moments. And I don't know if I can say one of the best moments of my life, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, it was just amazing to discover that. And from there, I went on to, because I'd spent so many years saying, I hate poetry. Well, how can I now write poetry? But shortly thereafter, I was still writing. I'd already published my memoir, and I was just writing short things. So little things were coming out of my pen, and I wondered if they might be poems. I couldn't be sure because I didn't have enough experience to even know, And that was about five or 6 years ago. And I went along to a 6-week discussion at the New South Wales Writers' Centre, and it was a discussion about poetry. And so we just listened to someone talk about poetry each week, and we took along a little piece of our own writing, and it turned out that what I was writing could in fact be referred to as poetry. So yeah, and so then I've just kept writing, and I just that's all I wanted, and to write, and here I have 2 collections of poetry, which still feels quite surreal in a way.
Oh, wow, that's so fascinating. I didn't expect you to say that. I think my next question was going to be, I guess, when did you begin to love poetry? And I didn't think you would say only 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I hated it.
Literally, that was it. And the first poem I think I read was John Berryman's Life, Friends, is Boring. We Must Not Say So. And those 2 lines just floored me, and they continue to floor me. I don't really know why, except that this, his sense of despair speaks to my sense of despair at some level, and that's what I love so much about poetry. The fact that you can take a moment within a story and make it into something. You can extract the emotion from an experience and turn it into a poem. You only need to speak about that emotion at that point in time. You don't need a beginning, a middle, and an end. Poems can just be as they are. I often think of them as things that just kind of float around in a way, and you can just sort of grab one, read it with no context, and let it go again. I just love that, the ability to dip in and out of poetry.
Mm.
So yeah.
I think I'm the same with poetry. For me, it always feels like just a moment or a feeling, and then that's enough, so long as it makes me feel something. So
I think it's definitely why it's so intriguing and urgent to me, this need to convey emotion as quickly as possible.
Wow.
When I sort of stopped writing prose and moved more into these shorter things, prose became too wordy. I needed to get to the emotion of things as quickly as possible. And that has stayed the same even in terms of what I read now. I will read poetry. I need to get back to reading more prose, but I just want that emotional payoff, and I want it quickly. So
that was a later question I had for today, just about that. Because there's something I've really noticed reading through your book is this connection between, vivid imagery and words and emotion. And I was actually going to specifically ask you if that was something, I feel like you've really honed in on, creating, I guess, that atmosphere and that connection to emotion in your work. So I was going to ask if that was, an intention, or if it's something that's just naturally progressed as you've, written poetry.
Yeah, I don't really have any intention really when I'm writing, except to how can I get as close to the emotion that I have felt in that situation? How can I get as close to that as possible on the page? And I don't know why that's such an obsession, but it is.
Oh, I like that a lot.
I just want to be able to pare it back and pare it back. Is that quite right? No, it's not. No, it's not. Keep working the line, keep working the line, you know, like weeks later, still on that line. Is it right yet? You know, and only once I'm exhausted by it, it's done, really, you know. So it's, yeah, I'm constantly mining myself for my emotional response. I just really want to get it as close to how I feel. And why would I want to do that? I don't know, other than I love doing it, you know. And when one hopes that one has achieved something like that on the page, that someone else will read it and perhaps enjoy it too. But I guess first and foremost, I think we're always writing for ourselves. You know, I know it sounds terribly selfish and narcissistic, but I think yeah, that's important to me. I'm writing because I love to write, and often now, when a poem is finished, I feel a certain kind of sadness in a way that that's finished now, because I love the process of writing the poem so much that you know, that toing and froing, that torturing the phrase one more time, trying to get it down on the page. There's this wrestling that goes on, which is so delicious and so exciting to me. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to spend my days doing that.
I love hearing about your process in how these words come about. It's really interesting. I guess building on that level of trying to bring your poetry as close to your emotion as possible. I'm really interested because I'm a writer too, but I write fiction, and I've always felt like there is almost a level of safety in writing fiction, as in my readers don't know what is true and what is not true in what I write. And for myself, that makes me brave enough to write whatever I want. And I'm really interested if you've ever struggled with, I guess, allowing yourself that level of vulnerability in your poetry, which is very clearly there. It's very raw and very honest. And I wonder if you've ever felt exposed by that. Like, is it something you've had to struggle through, or is that just not really how you think about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when my first poetry collection came out, the most common comment that I got on it was, "Oh, it's so honest." And it hadn't occurred to me that it should be anything else. It hadn't occurred. That took me by surprise that so many people said, "That is so honest. I didn't know you weren't meant to be that honest," in a way. And so that set me thinking that if I wasn't writing honestly, what would I be writing? You know, and I know that some writers will perhaps write, you know, a little bit more, with a little bit more distance between themselves and the work, but I that's just not how I write. And it's just, if I wasn't doing the way I'm doing it, I wouldn't be doing it, because it seems to me that there wouldn't be any point for me personally. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't, so for some reason, I'm okay to hang out all my dirty laundry in public. I think if you feel a certain way, by not saying it on the page, it would be sort of lying in a way, you know. So I like to, you know, there was only once actually where I thought, oh, should I? And it's one of the poems in this new collection. And it's got a very provocative title. And I hesitated for a second.
I think I know the one.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, the very fact that I'm hesitating here, it has to go in. It has to go in. And so it's in. And yeah, for some reason, just telling the truth. And I think a lot of people have reacted, certainly with the first book and this one, although this one's still quite new. A lot of people loved the honesty in it. And I don't know if that's kind of part of the time as well, that a lot of people are craving honesty in a way, in a world full of, who do we believe? Who do we turn to? You know, lies that are spread on social media, or untruths, or things that are not quite factual. And maybe there's something about the honesty of my poetry which is speaking to people at this point in time, because of where we are in society.
I totally agree with that. I think there's something very inspiring about reading something that's so honest, because you do find so many familiar moments in it that you recognize from your own life that you might not be willing to talk about or think about yourself. So yeah, I find it really moving. And I guess in this time of even social media and the way that we present ourselves online being, you know, a version of ourselves, like to find something that is so brutally honest is quite impactful, I think.
I think also the subject matter of previous poems and poems in this book, I don't shine an awesome light on myself. And I think people reacted quite well to that as well. You know, I'm not presenting myself as someone who is squeaky clean. And, you know, there are so many things that one does in life that one regrets. Well, and somehow I put them into my, for some reason, I've put most of those things into my poems. Yeah, and I think people see that and say, oh, she had an affair. Oh, and she's really, okay. You know, I just think that I'm not hiding behind anything, and I am what I am, and I've done things that I've done, and it's fine. It's fine.
I love that approach. I think that's really cool, actually.
Yeah, I think to not kind of be concerned about the outcome of what you've written, for me personally, I have to write the honest truth of things and not be concerned. You know, when my first book came out, my first book was a memoir, and that came out 10 years ago. And I'd said many things about, you know, unflattering things about my father, and he was still alive at the time. And I, you know, it wasn't until the book was in bookshops that it actually occurred to me that, oh, should I have thought twice about that? Well, it's too late. So, but I just love embracing the truth of things, and the sort of, I like embracing my dirty laundry, and I'm not afraid to share it. You know, absolutely. It sounds as though the book is really sordid. It's not. Yeah, so yeah, just the truth and honesty. It just seems to be something it's certainly important to me, and it seems to be connecting with people.
I think it definitely resonates. Yeah. I guess what I'd love to do now is I wanted to talk about a specific poem in your new collection, and hopefully you can read it for us. So this was Scotland Winter 2014. If you were okay to read it, and then I just had a question for you about it.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So I might just give you a really, really quick bit of context. And about 5 years ago, I went back home to Scotland. My parents were already separated, and I went back home to see my mum, who was very sick at the time. But by the time I got my flight and got there, she'd made a recovery, and my mum and dad were separated at the time. And so I went across to visit my father at his place, and he was gravely ill. And he died 9 days later unexpectedly. And so this poem, that's just a little bit of the context around this poem. So he spent his last few days in hospital. I went there every day to visit. And maybe also worth noting that I had a really turbulent relationship with my father. Scotland Winter 2014. Nobody knew what was wrong. We sat around your bed every night in the vinyl chairs for 4 hours that felt like 400 in our far from expert white coats, hypothesizing, Googling, guessing, lying mostly to ourselves and to you. I feared your thin, your evaporating legs, the blanket engulfing you, the mattress you were disappearing into. The thing was, you seemed a little better that night. You even bobbed your head in time to the jingle of the Cadbury's chocolate ad blaring from the telly in the corner of the shared ward. Your cousin Tommy came that night. The chocolate eclair your sort of wife brought the day before sat on your bedside cabinet uneaten, its brown paper bag saturated in the grease it had leached. The tube of condensed milk I'd brought to try to tempt you into eating something sat unsqueezed. When the bell rang at 8 o'clock, Mum swung her handbag over her shoulder, leaned in, kissed you on the forehead, said we were all off to the pub. Did you want to come? Nobody laughed. I rose slowly, tried my best to look disappointed. The 400 hours were up already, pulled my coat over the layers of my grief, felt my way into the solitude of my gloves, tied a scarf around my neck like a hangman's noose, and walked out of the ward, past the fat bastard snoring, down the sanitized corridor, pushed my way through the heavy swing doors that keep the fires out and the sadness in. We stood a while in the car park talking. Your cousin Tommy told us you didn't treat your sort of wife very well. If Tommy was saying it, it must have been true. Winter fog poured into the car park, weaved itself around our legs, settled on our feet like a fat grey cat, as bewildered visitors spilled from the hospital's infected mouth and into their cars, their yellow fog lamps casting damp shadows on the empty that filled me. I stopped off at the pub on my way home with my selfishly flawless health and perfectly functioning limbs, pulled up a narcissistic armchair by an indulgent log fire, ordered a self-absorbed gin. When the waiter brought me my gin, you were still alive. I raised my glass to the man you were, the father you weren't, and to the health and future it turned out you didn't have. Thank you.
So beautiful. I find it's such a powerful piece, and hearing you read it aloud is just amazing. But I think, it's obviously about grief and death, and I think anyone who has had similar experiences, you are just able to put, these complex, complicated feelings into such a compact piece of writing to explain those feelings that I think are usually very unexplainable and also not really talked about very much. So I really love it. It's very beautiful.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you so much.
Yes. I wanted to ask you, I guess about the process of writing about grief and maybe writing through grief, and whether that was a helpful process for you in, working through those emotions.
I can't honestly say whether it was helpful or not helpful, but it was urgent, and I wanted to. I mean, it was the most overwhelming experience of my life to be present at another person's final moments is an extraordinary thing, and particularly when it was my father, who I had a really turbulent relationship with. Like, it was filled with so many emotions. I can't even begin to list them. But of course, I've written about it extensively. But when I was with him, I would sort of take a couple of notes every day, so that at some stage I would be able to sort of make sense of it all. But the weirdest thing about all of it was that I'd gone back to visit Mum, and then, as it turns out, Mum recovers, and I end up catapulted into this experience that I had not expected. And I moved to Australia to get as far away from my father as I could, really. And so, we didn't speak much at all, only a couple of times a year. And as he aged, he mellowed. He was the kind of stereotypical man of his generation, father of his generation. And so, just to have been present with him as he breathed his last breath was the greatest privilege. Not because I got to sit with him while he died, but I just can't. I don't even know if I put that into words yet. But just to be present when someone is leaving this earth, nothing else was more important than that. And in that moment, I really felt like I was catapulted into adulthood in some kind of strange way. I had to show up in this situation, and I didn't want to be there. You know, I would have done anything to not be there, to still be in Australia, you know, to not have had to go through that. And yet, I'm going to cry. And yet, it turned out to be the greatest gift, you know, because I think it's something to do with having to have been so present to the point that every single nerve in my body was there in that moment, you know. And maybe that's a bit like meditation, that maybe that's what happens in meditation for people, or, you know, or whatever the case may be, but being there. And then, it was the enormity of it, and it was also the futility of it, or the simplicity of it perhaps, but that this human being, I counted his breaths in and out until they started getting longer and longer periods between each breath. And then a breath went in, and then it came out, and another one just didn't go in, and that was it. It was over. And I was so struck by this, and this feeling that life is, you know, cliche, so short. Oh my God, it's over, and the world is going to go on. You know, the nurse is going to bring us a pot of tea now and a plate of biscuits, and we're going to leave this room, and we'll get on with life, and that's it, done for you. And what did you do with your life? This is what it amounted to? Is that what your life amounted to? And so there was a million different competing emotions, you know, sadness, disappointment, sense of futility, hopelessness. But you know, when I stepped out of the hospital and into that abnormally bright Scottish sunny day, I decided there and then I was going to live my life differently, you know, and that I was going to take my life by the balls. And I just didn't want to waste a moment. And I knew that what I'd always wanted to do since my first book was I wanted to really give my writing a great shot. I wanted to be writing full time if I possibly could, but you know, we needed 2 salaries to survive in Sydney, and etc., etc. And so I came out of the hospital, and I decided that day I was going to give my writing a shot, you know, because, you know, I'd seen death, you know, I'd had this ringside seat. And so that was the most profound thing that's ever happened to me. It's been the most remarkable experience during it and subsequently. And so, you know, we buried my father a few days later. I was on a plane the next day back to Sydney, and I came back, and Thomas is my husband, and he agreed, yeah, give your writing a shot. So we sold up in Sydney and moved to the South Coast so that we could live on 1 salary. And that's what we've been doing ever since. And from the first day that I wasn't bringing in a salary, I treated my writing like a job. So I've always been someone who doesn't wait for the muse. I was motivated out of fear. You know, I've given up a salary, and what if I can't write? What if nothing comes out? What if it's all garbage? Who do you think you are? What have you done? You know, and so because of all of those fears, on the first day that I wasn't going to my paying job, I jumped out of bed and I went to my desk, and I did that every single day. I've done that every single day for the last 5 years, because what if I didn't do that, you know? And so I you know, this was my shot at it, to see if I could actually produce. I thought, if I can just produce even, you know, 1 book in that time, and I believe that, for me anyway, my writing comes because I'm doing it every day. Like I said, I don't wait for the muse. I will sit down at a blank page and I'll wait, and I'll push the pen and I'll write. Something will come out, and eventually something worthwhile salvaging will come out. And sometimes it's all garbage, but occasionally there's an idea. But the idea won't come from me, you know, sitting back and waiting for the idea. It's the process of pressing the nib against the page and write something, write anything. I mean, at first, when I came back from Scotland, there were so many emotions I wanted to write down anyway. There had been so many experiences. So I was never short of material. But just the discipline of going to my desk every day is what's, you know, gotten me 2 poetry collections now, you know.
I was actually going to ask you about that in terms of process, because you did the Working From Home blog series recently, an interview for Wakefield Press, and I got to see some photographs of your desk space, which is just beautiful. And I was going to ask whether you kind of, because it is obviously so carefully curated and lovely, if you needed that sort of space in order to write. But I think you've answered my question. You're a bit more...
Yeah, and interesting, you know, since we've all gone into lockdown, I mean, when the bushfires came, I live in a bushfire zone, and my routine was always get up, go out to a cafe and write it in a cafe, because I needed to be out in the world. And so I would go to a cafe, and that was my routine, up, shower, laptop, out. And that's what I always did. But when the bushfires came, we couldn't go outside. There was too much smoke. We couldn't breathe. And so I got used to being in the house, and I had to, you know, that was not an easy transition, because I needed to burst out and not be at home. But yeah, so I just have a space in you know, in the lounge room with my desk and my lovely little bits and pieces to make it pretty. And that's where I've been, you know. Obviously the bushfire experience stood me in good stead in a way to just keep working from home, you know, since lockdown. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm bouncing around my questions a little bit here, but since you brought up the bushfires, this wasn't the second poem I was going to ask you to read, but you also do video poems, and you did a poem recently as a reaction piece to the bushfires, which, you know, it went viral and got the attention of Malcolm Turnbull. And I guess I wanted to ask you a bit, if you can read the poem. This is Cold, Don't Be Afraid. And also maybe just talk a little bit about your experiences around that, because I know it was a last minute addition to the collection in the end.
Yeah, and so I guess, you know, because I live in a bushfire zone, and I was tuned to local ABC radio, and also at the same time, you know, looking at Sydney Morning Herald online. And as I sat listening to messages coming through local radio from the RFS telling people in fire affected zones, if you're in or close to the bush, leave now. These are chilling messages to get when you live in the bush. Just to be clear, we didn't get any devastating fire in my area, but we were evacuated one of the times because the risk was very high, but we didn't suffer it at all. But we were tuned to this local station all the time. One of the messages that came through was, if you are trapped in your car, face the oncoming fire front, get down below window level. This is your highest priority. I want to cry again, because someone had to receive that message. You know, like someone was, you know, trapped in their car, face the oncoming fire front. I just found it extraordinary. So I would be listening to these messages, and then I turned to the Sydney Morning Herald, and we had Scott Morrison in Hawaii, and all of the ridiculous things that he was saying, which were so out of touch with what was happening here, you know. And so my blood was boiling, but I was also terrified, and I was furious on behalf of people who were suffering. And I just started to, I sat down, I thought, I need to put these lines that I'm hearing together. So this poem became, it's called a found poem, which means the lines are all direct quotes from other sources. And I've just sliced them in one after the other in such a way as to try to bring about that sense of, you know, conflict, fear, terror. So yeah, I'll read that poem now for you. But yeah, I did, it got many views on YouTube, and then, as you say, Malcolm Turnbull retweeted it, which was lovely. And then it ended up on the Bolt Report on Sky News, and Andrew Bolt and his panelists were ridiculing it, which was, you know, it's fine by me. I mean, it's fine by me, but anyway, so this is Cold, Don't Be Afraid. If you are in or close to the bush, leave now. If you choose to stay, we may not be able to save you. Save any woolen blankets you may have. Wrap yourself in them when the fire comes. There is no better place to raise kids. If you are trapped in your car, face towards the oncoming fire, tightly close windows and doors, get down below window level. This is your highest priority. The Prime Minister regrets any offence caused to anyone for him being away at this time of crisis. For those of you in fire affected, insert town name here, it is now too late to leave. The girls and Jen will stay on and stay out the rest of the time we had booked here. We will not be changing our climate policy settings. But I'm comforted by the fact that Australians would like me to be here, just simply so I can be here alongside them as they're going through this terrible time. How good is Hawaii? If you don't have a bushfire, smoke respirator, P2, Aura flat fold mask, including valve 9322A+, maximum 2 packets per customer, was $94.95, now $77.45. Stay indoors. I don't hold a hose, mate, but I understand. People are angry, people are hurting. This is cold. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Seek shelter from the heat of the fire. But look, the girls and Jen, they love holidaying in Hawaii. And so we've had a few nice days here. Drink water to prevent dehydration. Evacuate your horse to the beach. Have your children row for their lives. Australians will be inspired by the great feats of our cricketers. This is not about climate change. We are meeting and beating our Paris Agreement targets. How good's Australia? To the 1 billion species we burned, how good's the cricket? You won't be getting any votes down here, buddy. You're an idiot. Leave the pregnant woman's hand alone. The sky will turn black. Turn your headlights on. You're out, son. Do you have a bushfire survival plan? Activate it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for reading that. I still remember when it was going around the office, and the first time I read it, we were still in the midst of fire disasters, and it's very powerful.
Yeah, and I was amazed that so many people connected with it. I was amazed, and I was glad, and yeah, it's interesting rereading it now. It feels like it happened 100 years ago.
I actually wanted to ask you about that, just in terms of the poems that you write, being about such intense experiences. How do you feel then once they are published and there is this level of you, I guess, having to revisit those emotions and those experiences over and over as your work goes out and you talk about what you do? Is that difficult sometimes?
When I first started reading my poems in public, it hadn't occurred to me that it would be difficult, and the first poem that I read, I could barely finish it because I was crying so much. It was disconcerting, and but the more I read them, obviously you just get a bit more experienced the more you read, and I think it's okay to lose your, lose control of your emotions to a certain extent when you're reading, and just kind of maybe stumble through some of the lines and just keep going. I guess if that's what it does to me, then that's what it does to me. But for the most part, it's, in the beginning it was, it took me by surprise to be so emotionally. I think I'd lived in such an internal world with the work for so long, and then it seemed all I had to do was pop out and read a few poems, and that was when it struck me that, oh dear, you know, this is quite challenging emotionally. But I, you know, obviously I keep doing that, and I love to read my work, and yeah, whatever emotion comes up, it comes up, and one just gets better at kind of swallowing them down a bit more, and keep going.
Yeah, of course. I guess in terms also of reading your work and in the ways that you get your work out there, we've mentioned before about the video poems. And I was really interested in what initially drove you to try video poems as, I guess, a different medium. And I guess I was wondering, do you think that they bring across a different emotion than written poetry? And do you have a preference, or you enjoy both?
I love doing those video poems. You know, I just love it. And I think at first I thought the only way to sort of record my work was to have my face on a video screen and read and I just, like most people, we don't want to look at ourselves on a screen. And we don't really like the sound of our voice either. I think that's true for most of us, you know. And I just can't, I just don't, I did a few videos of me reading my work because, like I said, I thought that's how it had to be. And then I guess then just one day I thought, I don't know why, I just don't know why. I just sort of stumbled on a little video clip and I was allowed to use it. And, you know, there's a couple of websites where you can use people's videos and images, and you just credit them for that. And so I think just tried that with one poem. And I loved the effect that brought, you know, and I love trying to find a video clip or make my own video clip and try to really match the mood of the poetry. And then I love to find a piece of music to put under it. And so the whole thing becomes a bit of a collage. It's endlessly fascinating to me. The only difficulty has been in trying to work out the technology. And every so often the technology gods line up and I manage it without dissolving into a puddle of tears. But I just love doing it. That's my cat crying. I just love doing it. I'm not really sure why. I think it engages more than just the part of my brain which is about producing the poem. And it surprises me that I can be sort of a little bit more creative with the poems, you know. So it's lovely fiddling around with that stuff.
And I think it's a great way to get your work out there in a different medium as well. I mean, it's one of the wonderful things, I guess, about the internet for modern poets. There is so many different avenues to reach people, readers or listeners. I guess I was going to ask you as well. So the lactic acid in the calves of your despair is the name of the whole collection, but it's also the name of one of the poems within it. And I really love this piece. I think it's beautiful. And I'm just very curious, you know, why that poem as the name, and is there a reason behind
Only
that?
because it sounds strange. Excuse me one sec.
Go for it.
My old cat, she is mad. So she's 21 and she kind of has just woken up. So the lactic acid in the calves of your despair is, I chose that as a title because it sounds slightly strange and offbeat and brings about a response, I guess, in people, which is what and why. You know, I think it's a title that's quite intriguing, and I think that kind of the sort of quirkiness of it speaks to the work within the collection. And I just chose that because it sounded, I think, strange, a little bit strange and a little bit quirky. And I was open to, you know, other suggestions. You know, Wakefield Press and I looked at another few options and we settled on this. And it's it's obviously the title of this particular poem, which is about grief, as many of them are in this collection and the last collection. And I think the lactic acid in the calves of your despair poem is the first one that I set video to.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. A video that wasn't of me. So I'm very relieved to find that, you know, there was little sort of that idea to just put a video together. Yeah.
It's a wonderful idea. I think we've got enough time, hopefully, for you to maybe read that poem for us before we hand over and see if the audience has any questions.
Okay. I have marked the page. So the lactic acid in the calves of your despair. I guess a tiny little bit of background, and I guess the poem speaks to the things that people are not sure what to say at times of grief for other people, and so I guess that's what this poem is about. The lactic acid in the calves of your despair. Let me pour tea into the holes of your grief, add drops to your eyes now emptied of tears. Wrap your wounds in gauze soaked overnight in my deepest concern. Let me wring out the sleeves of your thick woolen jumper, now drenched in the song of your mourning. Let me peg it to dry in what little sun there is, utter sounds that comfort, make tea that soothes. Let me know all I can say is, I'm so sorry. Here, drink this tea, then the sorry thing again. Let me wave you off from the base of the grampians of your anguish. Fill your backpack with squares of dark chocolate and emergency dried fruit nourishment. You will need it along the way. Know as you climb, your calves will burn with the lactic acid of your despair. Breathe into your pain. Know it will recede. Sit down a while and drink from the tartan thermos of your healing, and when you reach your cairn, lean into the wind. Look down into your valley of loss, marvel at the distance you have covered, at how far you have come.
That's beautiful, thank you.
Thank you.
I love it. It's
Thank you so
such a good poem.
Thank you.
I guess, Tracy, I'm not sure if you can hear us. I thought might be a good time if there's any questions from the audience, or otherwise I've got a few more I can ask.
Sure, yeah, we do have a question here from Steph. So she says, running away, you ran closer rather than further away. Your poetry stemmed from that rawness. Do you think your future or current work will be inspired with the same raw first impressions as your earlier self?
I didn't quite catch all the question, Tracy. I'm sorry, it was a bit crackly.
Oh, sorry, let me say that again. So Steph says, running away, you ran closer rather than further away. Your poetry is stemmed from that rawness. Do you think your future or current work will be inspired with the same raw first impressions as your earlier self?
I'm not sure. I mean, I imagine that my work will always be informed by the sort of the intense emotional feelings, and I think that's a good observation. You know, in running away, I actually got closer, or I certainly got closer to something in myself. So yeah, I guess, you know, I am writing a second memoir, and that is about going back to Scotland and reconnecting with the landscape and the culture and seeing the place with fresh eyes, the eyes of someone who's been away for a long time. And that collection is also, that memoir plays out via a journey that my brother and I take around Scotland. So again, it's very emotional and very kind of raw, and I'm just chipping away at that at the moment, and that seems to be where I default to, you know, the emotion of things. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question.
That's great. Poppy, did you have another question for Ellen? We've got about this evening, so if you'd like to ask another one, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, I guess I was really interested, Ali. There is quite a few poems within the collection that are about the process of writing poetry, which as a writer myself, I find very fascinating. So you've got poems in there about, you know, attending, the writing workshop, I think that you mentioned earlier, and a poem which is about, I guess, the guilt you feel if writing a poetry comes too easy to you. And I just, I guess I wanted to ask you about those poems and including those ones.
So there is a poem in there, which is a poem walks into a bar. That's what it's called. And it just came because, once in a blue moon, a poem will land in your lap. And all you've got to do is sort of write it down, and it's such a rare, it's quite rare, but it does happen. Maybe it's happened twice to me. But I just loved that idea of it as though a poem comes to me from somewhere and just hands itself to me, and so that was what that particular poem was about. And then there is another poem in there which talks about my experience on a 6-week workshop, and I found it to be quite a struggle, because I wasn't aware there were rules and there were things that were meant to be followed, and there were things called villanelles and haikus. I didn't know. I came to all of my writing from a base of nothing, and a writer friend of mine said to me, you're so lucky to have come to writing not knowing that there were certain ways of doing things, because you've just come at it raw and you write what you like without knowing somewhere in the back of your mind, whether it's from academia or whatever, that you can't do that and you must do this. So and so I'd had fun with the workshop poem, which is called Notes from a 6-week Writing Course, something along those lines. I had a lot of fun with that, and the person running the workshop had suggested for the next week's homework we should all write a sonnet, and I wanted to die because I couldn't, it had to be 14 lines and it had to be 10 syllables a line. That was like, that kind of, I wanted to do that. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that I would have to perhaps go home and try this, and I couldn't. I went home, I tried it, and I sort of felt like I was wrapped in a straitjacket. So my writing style has only ever been free verse. And I emailed the course tutor and I said, I just can't do it. And he said, oh, look, just give it a go. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I ended up giving it a little bit of a go. But in that poem, I end up just having fun with the fact that I'm trying to get this homework down, and somehow, and this is the lovely thing about writing as well, somehow in the process of writing that, the poem went into the woods with Hansel and Gretel, and Hansel and Gretel are kind of walking through the woods and they're sort of trying to find a clearing, and letters start to appear, and it was kind of silly and funny, and it was and quite lovely in parts, I think, but that was my process there. I just was kind of ridiculing myself in the poem, as I often do, and having fun, and again just saying it like it was.
I loved reading those poems. I think it's so interesting to sort of understand that insight, I think, as well, in I suppose how difficult it can be to write poetry and so many different thoughts in your head, because I think some of your words, they do seem to the outsider to be effortless, I suppose. So it was very interesting to get that window into, oh no, you've gone to try and learn and try and do these things.
Yeah, I think that's the point of when I'm writing. A poem can take months and months to be ready, and so it's almost like you are ironing out the wrinkles for weeks until a reader can arrive at that poem or piece of prose and read it as though it was, it has to be read effortlessly, I think. And so that is why it takes so long to write anything for me personally, because I'm always trying to iron out these wrinkles so that I can make it as fluid or fluent as I possibly can.
Yeah, I get that. It's like dancing, Fred Astaire is supposed to look effortless, but we all know the truth.
That's right.
Well, I think we've got 5 minutes left. So I think, Ali, if you were open to it, it would be amazing to maybe get one more poem read.
Sure.
And I was wondering if you would be open to reading one of the most recent video poems that you put up was I Am the Sea, which I loved. I went and read it, in my book after I first heard it. And it's just it was very emotional. It was the kind of poem I just had to sit and let rest with me before I wanted to do anything else. So I think it'd be lovely to share that with everyone at the end.
Thanks. Thank you. I will. So this poem is about one of the times I went back to Scotland to work on the memoir, and I'm with my brother in the poem, and yeah, it's our relationship has been up and down, but I have always, we love each other desperately, but there have been times where there's been long periods of time with no contact, and so this poem talks a little bit about that longing. I am the sea. The sea heaves, swallows herself down like cough syrup in thick, slow gulps. We'd sat on this rock just 2 days before, both of us with our backs to the world, staring out across and into the thickness. I counted 1,001 seagulls that day, watched them huddle together, balanced like storks on a single orange leg, the other nestled up in the warmth of their soft white bellies as they, with uncharacteristic patience, waited for the rain that would surely fall. And when the wind whipped up, Andrew jumped from our rock, pulled his emerald green kite from his rucksack, tore off down the desolate beach, his kite ploughing a trench in the sand behind him, eager for the gust that would lift it to where it wanted to be. And every few seconds he'd turn around and run backwards, untangling cords and calling out across the increasing distance between us, "Come on, Ali, come on." And I heeded his call, jumped from our rock and ran as fast as I could, in jeans frozen stiff as though they'd been pegged on the line in an overnight frost, and I shrieked with the gladness of finally being here with him, and no black clouds could ever threaten this day for us. He kept on running and turning and untangling till finally a gust obliged and his emerald green kite soared skywards and free as we are ourselves if only we'll listen. We'd parked the car just up there by Mancini's snack van, closed for the winter now, its Magnum ice cream posters faded and neglected, flat listlessly in the wind. And the menu, promising hot chips and curry sauce, hangs on the outside wall, saturated by rains gone by, forcing words to fade, corners to curl, and brown moisture spots to appear in the most unappetizing of ways. We'd laid our picnic out on this rock, poured tea from our tartan thermos, ate buttered rolls, dunked McVitie's chocolate digestives, and talked till the sun slipped off her shoes, turned out the light, and slithered into the black dreams of the Irish Sea. And days later, with him already too long gone, I am sitting on a rock with my back to the world. The sea heaves still. I watch her swallow the sadness rising in her throat as broken-hearted waves throw themselves at the feet of a shore that really couldn't care one way or the other. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
I think that brings us to the end of today. So before I hand back over to Tracy, I just want to say thank you so much, Ali. It was really, really fun to chat with you about your poetry. I've enjoyed the book so much, so it was really cool to get to ask you all my questions.
That is so good. Thanks for all the lovely questions. That was superb. Thank you.
I guess, Tracy, if you're there, we'll hand back to you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Ali. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
I just love your accent. It's simple voice, by the way. And I could
thank you.
poetry all night, but we don't have any time left. But thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you to Poppy. I can't wait to get a copy of your book and look forward to hearing more of your raw honesty in your poetry. It's simply amazing. And that piece about your father was just so powerful.
Oh, thanks, Tracy. Thank you so much. And
this
thanks
is
to everyone who came and listened tonight. Thank you.
And this is Cole. I mean, wow, it certainly portrayed the confusion and fear that those affected by those bushfires would have felt. So
yeah, I felt very lucky. A lot of people who were in fire affected zones contacted me to say thank you for writing that, you know, and that was an extraordinary privilege to get any messages like that as well.
I think I'll look that one up on YouTube again and have another listen to that one. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
And everyone that joined us tonight, thank you as well. And please keep following the Marion Library's Facebook page. Check our website and check your inbox to be kept up to date. Inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops. If you haven't already registered, this Thursday afternoon, we will welcome best-selling author Kirsty Manning as she talks about her latest novel, The Lost Doors. So thank you, ladies. Have a great night and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.